I'm trying to coexist, exist. Yeah, I'm trying to coexist, exist. I'm trying to coexist.
Welcome back to the Ethical Guild podcast. What are we going to talk about today? Of a very controversial character who dominated the world. We're largely talking about Genghis Khan and the Mongol Empire. How can we analyze what this character was? First, we must know what his childhood was like, how his parents dedicated it, what he learned and suffered during this stage, what kind of traumas he had to endure so he could be the resilient man he was in his Andamar. And as we can see, these great geniuses of history, not only that they have a very beautiful story to tell, but a diagram and a plan of how to bear very heavy loads, and Genghis Khan was not. He was no stranger to heavy loads. We understand his psychology of why it was important for him to protect and give opportunities in bureaucratic positions to women. We also see that Genghis Khan had an understanding towards diplomacy, despite having been considered a barbaric and genocidal man, and who is said to have planted many seeds with many women during his life. However, we can always focus on the bad, but we also have to focus on the good, right? And we can see how the prosecutor had an understanding thanks to his culture. But the most important thing was his honor code, the Mongolian honor code, which was unwavering to the point that they were one with the earth and sought never to pollute. They were perhaps the first pioneers to respect nature and endure a nomadic life. Mongol Genghis Khan was a very adaptable evolutionary man, but also a warrior who showed no mercy to his rivals. But we also see that a man. What did he care about progress and trade in general? Perhaps he was the first man who had the idea of creating a bank thanks to the headquarters route. And since this also caused the finances of his empire to grow equally. But why tell you more? There is much more to tell you in the podcast. So if you haven't subscribed, I recommend that you do. And let's talk about Genghis Khan and his legacy. Let's get started.
Let's start. Go to the Sung dynasty and demand tribute. Tell the emperor that the great Khan requires their submission.
Let's talk about Genghis Khan. You could say that Genghis Khan is the person who conquered the most lands, had the most domains in the world. From the West, it connected to Europe. He was a person, we could say that he is controversial, since likewise, as he had very good political ideas, he also carried out his conquests with great
crudeness,
with a lot of spite and revenge. And San was a man who could be said to be this visionary, but in those visions of conquest, there was also a lot of bloodshed. And that's what we are going to talk about Genghis Khan today. First, to understand Genghis Khan, we have to perhaps begin how he began his life, right?
Yes, I think that of all the podcasts that we have always had in general, we have to look at what their childhood was like, how they were cared for, because at the end of the day, they are the foundations that one sits on or on which the adult man is cemented. And yes, do you have grudges, repressions at the end of your adult life? Is it going to have repercussions, or are they going to surface in a very exaggerated way, in the sense that you no longer have that freedom, that you have a father who, in quotes, is oppressive in the sense that he doesn't let you develop your ideas very well? Then you are free of thought and your ideas are unleashed.
But from there, in singing a childhood that we could say it's unlikely to happen to anyone. I mean, since he was little, he was influenced. Well, it's logical. He had an older brother, an older half-brother in Genghis Khan. And he was raised with a very strong mother and also with a father who was a natural leader, right? And it is very curious to see how at such an early age, that is, we also have to train the Mongolian culture that from a young age, they started training with the bow and arrow and with the horse. That is practically, they were born to ride a horse. I mean, imagine not being afraid to put a child of what do I know from 1 year old to ride, but that's how they were. The horses are well trained so that perhaps they know the Mongolian people adapt to the fact that that was their life, not the horse and the person became and we see how was that training development since I was very young?
What's the matter? It's like you say, it's part of the culture of how they, within their environment, they see that so natural and normalizes all those types of attitudes. So he grows up under that type of influence, and outside that type of upbringing, there is no longer any, because only they. And indeed, back then, when he was alive, everything was war, all fighting then. You had to train your offspring from a very young age so that they could defend themselves, especially because their father was a leader. So being a leader, he was always going to see the danger that someone might come and invade his lands. It's defending what's yours.
Of course. And apart from that, we also have to understand the lifestyle. She was nomads, that is, they were very adaptable people who took their belongings and moved from one place to another. I mean, I think that also has a lot of influence in their ability to adapt, that is, never cling to something because they are always moving from one side to the other. What do you think of that, David?
Historically, survival meant cultivating a mobile lifestyle, roaming in search of sustenance, unlike today's settled societies with permanent structures. According to protect themselves from inclement weather, protect themselves from their enemies. So that's why they were not in a single place, and they had to locate themselves according to their own strategy, first to be able to survive, and second to occupy different territories. And so all that territory you began to limit the territory.
Yes, biologically this one makes sense. With this thought was his way of defending himself, not his enemies. But something very curious also in the learning of this early age of Genghis Khan was how they interacted with nature. For example, although they were nomads, they never escaped near a river or the sea because they understood the danger of polluting the water. And they camped 1 kilometer away. They preferred to camp 1 kilometers and look for water instead of camping there and having the danger of contaminating it. No. I mean, they had an understanding about the environment and how important it was about and taking care of the environment because they were being nomads, right? They understood the importance of survival with nature, yes.
Because inside your thought was that remember and not pollute, not even do anything near a water well, not even, since they were dedicated, not non-dedicated, they were used to defending themselves or fighting for their territory. They did not do so near the water reservoirs of the wells. So he is not only respect if it is not a culture of water was crucial, not merely for basic survival, but as a protected resource with a broader purpose.
Of course, and no. And the important thing, because they themselves in Mongolian culture were talking about it being easier to go get water than to pollute it and then try to decontaminate it. In other words, they had a clear understanding of the danger posed by pollution to nature, and they understood that they could avoid pollution by staying away from the water source. Yes, of course. I mean, I find it very interesting because anyone who thinks the Mongols were savages, no, they didn't have a spirit or were cruel. But we see here the impact that, or could we say the union they had with nature.
Yeah, but of course, right. But remember, we all know you have to see what happened to them to have that respect, because that is not that, as we have seen before, something must have happened. Something must have happened for them to have learned, because this is not a culture of complete respect. You know, something has to happen to you for you. You can become aware. Human beings are like that. So maybe something very complicated must have happened, that I poisoned someone near a water body and that poisoned the water and more people died. So their learning must also have been hard because this is learned, this is learned based on something an event that marked them, and that is why they began to defend. Remember, I didn't have the same knowledge of what we have now, pollution. I must think it was because some very complicated event surely happened, something that caused him to die. People motivated by harm.
An evil like cholera could be, right?
No more like cholera. I see that they poisoned someone near a water well, or they fumbled the water well and many died, or something complicated must have happened for them to have made that determination, because it is not something that a decision is made that is taken like this from the legion, or of course there had to be.
Yeah, you have to have had a life experiment so that they have learned the lesson. Were they welcomed?
Yes, or that they simply considered him a part of a deity. And that's why the respect, the god of water, the god of wind. Then it could also have been for the religious part, but for what it had been, that was a tactic that served him and for which they too. They survived many calories. They were strong because in the end, they preferred to go see the water and return to where they found you. Carrying water is a good thing, that is.
But that,
Form character and form warriors.
of course, and apart, you see how they always preferred their convictions over their comfort, see? Well, they were very spiritual, weren't they? And to understand a little of the rituals that they did at an early age, the father already looked for a wife when he was a child practically every time.
Part of their culture was that good. Some cultures are maintained like this. They choose from a very early age, but that's what they were. You also start with a responsibility and also learn the fact of generating a promise that you had to fulfill. That promise, that is, you know that we all change, is over the years, and you asked for your wife, you chose her, and you didn't see them again until marriage. It was part of the culture, but it was also about this, about being able to say, take responsibility at an early age, because from a very young age, they organized this thing of going to look for a wife, and it was also to exercise alliance between clans.
Sure, and they were looking for, as they say, the strongest plan, not to be able to unify strength and thus protect themselves against other plans that also sought alliances and also sought to take away their assets. And you have to also understand that at that time for the Mongols, it was the most important thing. It was women and horses. That was his priorities number. That is, the wealth bridge was that. When they conquered, they took the horses and also the women.
Yeah, I think inside one of the phrases was that a Mongol wasn't a Mongol if he didn't have a horse. That is what also, and what they were looking for, was that the most precious good was the LA, the horse, how to mobilize them. For them, the greatest wealth was horses and women, because at the end of the day, it was those who did the work and those who stayed at home because they passed by seeing territory, fighting, doing what they did. But the woman was always the provider at home, and the one who took care of the children, and the one who took the reins of the home however she wanted, let's put it this way. So getting a good wife was also something that they had to be wise to achieve. And they...
Sure, and they were looking. Remember that was going to look for a strong woman with strong hips, strong legs. And that's how Genghis Khan met his wife, the one he believes in all the scriptures, in all the things that he talks about, that in this, it was the beloved of him, that is his true love, which at an early age I told him, well, I will return. I think it was 6 years that I had to go through something like that to not be able to get married. And even it seems that the person who was chosen, even her, he had a hint that she was the chosen one and let him know that from the beginning that she was the strongest she should be. She must be the chosen one, and practically she was.
Is it that way? Yeah, maybe she was the one who chose him and it's not them, then yes.
Fuck it, Mexican there.
He succeeded in earning her affection and commitment.
Psychologically clear. And no. And here comes the important thing, because here comes an abrupt change in the life of Genghis Khan. Why? Because Genghis Khan lives a good life at this point, that is with his father, his family, a good mother, a strong mother. He lived practicing the bow and arrow, the horse, that is the normal life of a Mongol. Suddenly, on his journey to return to his home, no, logically it happens that he is offered a drink, and in that drink, his dad seems that in Mongolian tradition, it is not always to see you strong, and he knowing that the other people who offered him this drink were not very supportive of him, took it as a sign of courtesy and leadership. However, the drink they gave him was unfortunately poison, and here comes a drastic change in Genghis Khan's life.
Of course, because let's see, this marks the beginning of, let's put it this way, of the legend or the name or how he was formed, because from there he had to take charge. He puts it in charge, but in turn there is an uprising. Then they abandoned the entire family, and he, as he was going to be the heir, was obviously the target of the enemies, and that made Atribuya hide, survive.
Sure, and here you see the real one. Process that I think is Genghis Khan's greatest strength, his ability to be adaptable, because at that age he had no choice but to do it and be resilient. Look, we're talking about a kid. We're talking about an adult. We're talking about a kid. 13 years old, maybe more or less approximately 13 years old. And not only does he have to run, but they also look for him as a fugitive. They want to kill him. I mean, imagine what's going through his head when he arrives. He just dies. His father has not even been able to properly mourn the death and memory of his dad. All the people, that is, all those who belong to their father's clan, betray them and them. With very few are left behind that. Those who were loyal to your father revolt and become rebels, and now they want to kill Genghis Khan.
Of course, because at the end of the day, part of his environment or how to say it, within his laws or his rules, was that he should not leave an enemy, because that is maybe the one who's going to kill you and then comes looking for you to kill you. Then they shouldn't let him leave, because after all, they knew he was going to seek revenge in the end. So that's why they decide to find and kill him too. But within their belief too, or in their how to say it within of their codes of honor, was not to kill. Notice it so then. Some believed it was better to kill enemies when they were older, while sparing them as children within their tradition.
That's right, and I think it's critical, because imagine without that code of honor, there wouldn't have been a Mexican. That is, they would have died, but they were very traditional, extremely traditional. But here we see something that I really like about Mongolian culture, loyalty to their codes. I mean, they are so loyal to their convictions. I mean, they created rules, not just for them. They created rules so that culturally everyone respected themselves. And those who did not respect those codes were considered dishonorable, who were put aside from society, and were not even considered as Kant, who is a leader, says, which is very big, isn't it? So it's very important to understand why the word and why the codes were so important to the Mongol Empire at that time, right? And something that really caught my attention during this time is resilience, which I think he never did. He knew that he had, because for you to escape at that age, not understanding many things, not because you are still a child, even though you have experience, you have seen many things, but you do not have the experience of how to cope. For example, being in the cold for so long. But they, as they are, love nature. It's like before all this happened, Genghis Khan was mentally prepared, psychologically and physically, to bear all this counterweight of the trauma of his father's death and everything, all the conditioning that came with it. Because even when he escapes and catches him, no, there they put a wooden yoke on him that was too heavy. And here we also see how decisive.
Welcome back again, Ethic Skill Podcast, where we explore human experiences. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do not forget our campaign. We are committed to transform your subscriptions into pro bono programs for mental health, so you can free somebody's mind from their traumas and help them heal just by subscribing. Very simple, and it costs absolutely nothing. Help us through this campaign, and we just want to pay forward, not only to our viewers, but for those that can't afford mental health services. Just remember, the statistics are real. Only 4 out of 10 Americans can afford mental health services. So help us change that. Hopefully, we can move the statistics and perhaps move it from 4 to 5 out of 10 people have good mental health services.
Let's start. Of course, and yes, of course, and he runs away, but he was caught, yes, but also no, they didn't kill him because he was a child. So, okay, you're captured and you have to live this way and you have to almost be a slave, but you managed to escape. And obviously there is another of the things that I loved was the fact that at the time they were afraid of rain, thunder, and he couldn't escape. He had to adapt and not be afraid because he was out in the open. He wasn't shielded from anything. Then he lost that fear. That helped him lose a fear. So he was very smart and he was able to escape. But that didn't mean that the problem was solved because he was still alive.
That's right. And but also here we see a period of time where he disappears. That is, he flees and disappears. So those moments, because we are already talking about a child entering adolescence, of course, and already transforming into a man, then what could he have done? Because unfortunately, Mongolian culture, they never wrote the stories. The only thing they wrote was the laws that were important to them. No more codes, no more. They never wrote the stories of greatness, nor did they make monuments. They had that culture of always staying humble.
Yes, and also remember that thanks to the Mexican, they created their alphabet and believe in the thing of language. So it wasn't something stipulated, let's say stipulated, but what happens? The legend of the formation is because of the story, because of what was told afterwards, because of how relevant it was, because of what I saw. Many put different dates of birth, different dates too. Remember that it is a little difficult to calculate because at that time they were carrying another type of calendar, not the calendar we carry now. So there may be discrepancies as for dates, but part of the story has been told and we know that it was not an example, or we were able to know, or we can learn from it. Then I think so does he. He, for example, survived all this and was the resilient one. And it's all because at that time there was nothing to distract you. You remained focused on your thoughts, on your ideas. There's no such thing as now. Many distractions that make us wait for the approach. So these great heroes, these great characters were able to fulfill the admirable role, or that they were part of history, is because they were focused. They never lost the market because there were no distractions that there are now. Now there are many distractions and it's easier to procrastinate. Focus.
No, that's true. You hit the nail on the head there, because if you think about this period where we don't know very little about him, he must have trained, he must have prepared himself even more, because he knew that his enemies were not only in search of him, but he knew that already when he started him, he was already an adult and he was no longer going to have the mercy they had towards him. Rather, they were going to make a pact to kill them, not the way they wanted from the beginning. So I think that, as you say, his mind perhaps only focused on the overtraining of the horse's arrows, and also thinking that is in his mind. What do I do if he comes? And there perhaps a strategic mind was formed, right? Well, you have to think one step ahead of your enemies.
Of course, then, well, as I tell you, what's more, it was easier to focus at that time because there were no distractions then, not like now. You want to start thinking and you have 1,000 distractions, television, internet, social networks, and you lose focus. Instead, he didn't. He had to be. And he knew what his goal was. Her goal was to regain her clan, regain her possessions, regain her territory, regain her family, and get rid of those who had wronged her. I mean, something that was then was that I have my enemy, they betrayed me. I have to reduce them because it's them or me. I mean, I have to survive. So he increased his focus. There were no distractions. So he didn't have the distractions because he always had to be hidden, exercising, making alliances, strategizing so he can't get caught. So it was someone who self-destructed or trained to survive. So that for me was the most important thing because that's what made him the great military strategist. It was because his achievements were phenomenal, barbaric. The expansion of the Mongol Empire, let's say, covered almost all the way to Europe, then in a very large territory. And now with all the technology, we can see such a conqueror.
No, you're right. I hadn't thought of that, of the alliances, that is him. He had to learn how to negotiate when he started to ally himself, because let's remember that he started to have a small army. It's not that he is alone. He begins to have his little one an alliance with the one to the other, and he is beginning to create his plan. Here he comes, as he says, the beginning of his empire. That segregation led him to that. He had no other choice. But apart from that, the courage, I think something we should point out is, as you said, he had the thunder and he confronted his fear. But above that, the courage that he had, because even knowing that they were chasing him, knowing that everything was against him, he even went to look for his wife, to whom he wanted to keep his word, and he's going to look for her, knowing that
You can look for him there, can't you?
Sure, and not only that, but it's also good. Here you can also see the commitment, because after the stipulated time that he was going to return, he never returned, but his partner also waited for him.
That's right.
So it's good part of what the codes of honor were at that time, and they had to be followed. So it's different now. Now there are no these codes if we teach him, because as I tell you, there are many distractions now.
What makes us put the focus?
David, leave me now, since you touched on that topic that I think is very important, and perhaps we can expand on this a little. The codes of honor, for example, you have to be brave. That's why I'm telling you, for me, Genghis Khan had that. Courage not only came from his desire to want to survive and want to recover, but also the desire of his culture to honor itself with its word. Now, and you said something, today many people lack that because they would never give in to their comfort for their conviction. Why you? Why do you think that nowadays it is difficult, apart from distractions, to honor oneself with a code of honor?
First, because we have not learned, we have not seen you train in these codes when you have to face yourself with unknown things or things you don't know. You don't know, excuse me, how can I put it? When you face difficult situations, you become more respectful in the codes of honor. When you have easy situations, you know that there is an easy way, or that someone or something that makes it easier for you. Don't comply with the codes because you say, nothing is going to happen to me, but instead it won't.
It was, if you didn't comply, they could kill you if you didn't comply. At that time, the only thing they had of value was their word. Previously, the most valuable thing a person had was his word. Now,
a person's value is measured by money or possessions. So the most valuable good at that time was the word, not now the word. For the most part, I'm not saying that there are no people who don't order their words, but it's more difficult because there is a different value or one appreciation of different value, as we saw at the time. In the value part was to continue acting and continue to be yourself, even if we have everyone against it.
Sure.
When we saw the value part, I didn't know if it was your internet or not, but I didn't listen to you.
Yeah, there.
Yes.
Now let me like this. Fix okay. Let me see if the camera is okay. The issue seems to be there. The point where the failure occurs. If you talk about me, yes, it relates to me. Absolutely.
Yes.
Okay, then are we going to continue? Well, I believe that by not having consequences, as you say, and by having this hypervigilance that he had to have over his own life, he took it. Always try to fulfill yourself. Nowadays, we can fail so many times. We can have so many excuses because we always think there is another chance. Genghis Khan didn't have that. Genghis Khan was a failure, and now I cease to exist. My clan, the honor of my father, my mother, who is still alive, the woman I engaged to, nothing will ever happen. In other words, I think that, as you say, David, commitment is so important to ourselves. First of all, to be able to honor ourselves not only with our words, but with our actions. And I think Genghis Khan understood that both his actions and his words were equally important. They were relevant, and not just relevant because of the code, but he understood that not only did his life depend on it, but there were others who also depended on it. And I think that responsibility led him to think beyond himself. because he imagines that in survival mode, it is that of having had many thoughts, of wanting to live too, not just to survive. No, because who would only want?
Thinking about survival and not thinking about an experience, right?
Sure, but let's see. Here are several points in view, several edges to begin with. He, as the leader, was part of the leader. Let's say he was part of the social ladder of his clan. He was the one at the top. He was not a person of the base or the common of his clan. Therefore, he had an honorable position, better education. You had your father's strategy, but you lose it. That is, from being someone who had everything to someone who no longer has anything. So it's a power of resilience, of knowing that you were there, you had the best horse, maybe the best sword, the best food. You started to have nothing. And look for yourself, that is, you yourself unfold. That is, here is another point in favor of him. Because if at this moment we take someone who is in the elite and release him with nothing, he is not going to survive anymore. Then not him, not him, not him. It's just that he came from below and maintained himself. No, he was up within the scale of his comfortable life. He was up, he had the best. And then from there to running away, hiding, surviving, adapting to no longer having anything and being in nothing.
The life of, just as you say, made him see how he should be, how he should take every step. And it made it super strategic. Because we even see that when he gets his wife back, he doesn't ask her for her hand. They get married. They are together to live with his mother. That is logically. His nomadic life does not move from one side to the other depending on the season. We see how his enemies go, and the LA kidnap his wife. No, but his brave wife also, so that they do not kill him. She gives herself up so he can continue to survive.
Of course, it's part of his. Well, it's not environment, it's part of the education she received. That is, that she prefers her life to the life of her husband, the fighter, and the one who knows that if she surrenders and takes her, he is going to rescue her again, and that he, by his code, is not going there. And not only that, but you offended me then. You have to be prepared now, because I'm going to enforce. I mean, she already knew that if she turned herself in, she wasn't going to die too. She was going to be executed. No, but she was going to be kidnapped and also be part of the captor's clan. But she does it because of the conviction that he is going to rescue her, or that he is going, or he has that part of honor to return in this case, the offense. Let's put it this way.
But there we see David also the power of acceptance. No, because today, as you say, if we compare times, today it is very difficult for us to accept problems, accept adverse situations. They, in their culture, were preparing for this. That is, it can be seen. It can be seen because it is something that the woman does not even resign herself to, accepts it and says, well, this is the role that now plays for me. Now, whatever comes, I have.
Make me responsible. And likewise, Genghis Khan, we see that he also takes him, if he has an alliance with a friend that he has known since childhood, and with him they seek to ally themselves, become stronger to be able to counterattack and recover his wife. And that was their strategy, not the alliance. And then I think that here also Genghis Khan realizes that he may be a military genius, but only he will never achieve anything. He realizes that, and this is where his diplomatic power comes in too, because we have to remember Genghis Khan. He's a great diplomat in many things. No, then we see that he gathers the necessary forces, makes war against the clan. The opposite kills these two people who were vile villains, it must be said. That is, we see Genghis Khan as logic, a genocide, who committed a genocide, who had many women and all this. But there were people worse than him, who were these two scoundrels, could you say, and kills them and gets his wife back, but gets his pregnant wife back? No, yes.
Of course, because events were not so fast, is do it like this. But what I'm going to is that, as you say, what happens is that part of the way of thinking of the Mongols back then was that they had to finish everyone. Why? of course, under the laws of not killing women, because they consider it essential and very barbaric. But if they let someone survive, that was an enemy, and he could go back to killing. That is why their attitude when they are already a large army is to destroy everything, to be so bloodthirsty and barbaric, because they did not want to leave anyone to rebel. And obviously they instilled fear in that way. And so his army was growing, and the traitor was considered for the death penalty then.
In that, of course, and for example, here comes psychological warfare, which they also did psychological tactics, because they instilled fear by attacking the weakest fringes. But he did it with a severe barbarity that, for example, when listening to the stories of the soldiers that they deliberately left alive, they no longer wanted to fight. That is, they intimidated psychologically. But something that I also really liked about James Card was so much the honor code that there is an episode where he is logically with his ally, his blood friend, who are practically blood brothers, they become enemies because they both had their own ambitions, of course, and the friend had his general. And unfortunately, those generals wanted to go with Genghis Khan. Rather, they betrayed him to his friend and Genghis Khan. What really caught my attention was that he ordered him to execute those traitors for them, not having been loyal to his old change. That is, even the code of honor of them. It was something you couldn't do.
Manipulate? Yes, because it was also a way to protect yourself. He, because it was going to be expensive, knew that the one who wanted to betray him must break up. When he handed us over, he broke a rule. That rule, obviously the only punishment for breaking was death. I mean, that's how you also made sure you didn't get off.
That's right. And also this one, not even his friend, because they already went to war themselves. And logically, Genghis Khan manages to triumph over his SU, his brother of his blood friend, as they themselves said, the one to the other. And he told him, if you want, come serve me. But to his friend tells him, as I will always be like a beam for you. Why? Because I already betrayed you. How can I not instill trust me or distrust? Right? And what he did ask him was that, please, if what killed him, but no, it didn't make him bleed, because for them to bleed was to lose part of his spirit. And logically, they had methods of how to do that. But it seemed to me something very surprising how, that is, we also see the nobility in James Khan so that those he wanted did not.
Of course, because he more or less, the phrase of them, a brother, that is the family nucleus, was very important to them, not only in blood, but to friends, to those who were considered friends as brothers. That is, it is a code that they had, just like with wives, because at the end of the day, it looks like his children were not biologically his, so I know the part of the story things that do not agree. So those children weren't his then, but he adopted them, and how to put it, he took them as his own.
Of course, and we see the human side of Genghis Khan not here, because he has it all and loses it all, and then has to fight to have what was truly his from the beginning. We don't see here his degree of humility. We see here his degree of nobility. We see a heart that is willing to love, because he never took revenge on his wife, which unfortunately was raped by these men, not repeatedly. Rather, he always loved his children. That is, he loved them. He never treated them differently from the other, what they were not biological. For him, they were all the same. And here we see a different side to the conquest of the empire. Mongolian, exactly. Then this is where we can, if we do a psychological analysis, we see that what formed a great warrior was not only strategy, it was not only survival, it was also love, the love that he had. Maybe his father wants revenge, not to love towards his wife. Because here we also have to differentiate the different motivations that he had to do all this. And we see that one motivator was to claim what was his, and that is what he belonged to him. But here on the other side, we see that there is also an infusion of love, of something stronger than revenge, because he was willing to forgive even an enemy like his blood brother, right? Or his blood friend. Yes.
Of course, what happens is that, as I tell you, they had very strict codes, and they were very strict in terms of their word and the codes, which is he segmented later when the conquest occurs and he was the great leader. So he segmented these easy rules, but of tacit application. And everyone had his punishment breaking these codes, simple codes of the Mongol law at that time. So this helped him cope with every one of the events that occurred within him in his life, of which he could have been, let's just say, he fell very low in the part of surviving, living, and continuing in the face of adversity, being a person who stayed aligned with his principles and his codes. So he, although he was in adversity, never wavered and continued to replicate his beliefs and act tacitly as were the regulations that he himself professed. He didn't break, let's put it that way, those principles. So in the face of adversity, and what he mostly also made him resilient was love for his family, his father, his wife, to his children, to his mother, which was what he survived and kept himself captive, imprisoned. Many things happened, but part of the story was for revenge, for him. As we saw, he was the descendant and the one leader, a Khan. But no, they didn't let him be Khan because they killed the father and everyone betrayed him. But then he had won.
First, it must be said that an education
Different, definitely. I also see the development of how he also helps him train his army to be very efficient, because something that speaks, that is the story about Genghis Khan and his warriors, were not that they were not only skilled with the arrow, or with the bow and arrow and the horse, but discipline. I mean, I see that Genghis Khan, with all the experience that he acquired throughout his life process, being a good strategist, he knew the importance of efficiency. Something surprising that really captivated me was that normally today in wars, if you move 10 to 15 miles, considered quite, the Mongol army moved 70 miles. We are talking about something that is, we are talking about what they were and were not after. I mean, his modus operandi was like a style, you could say guerrilla, a combination of advanced artillery for the era, almost like motorized mechanisms, was utilized effectively.
Of course, because remember that they were the most important thing out there. They were the horses, and they were the domain of
the horse. The way of attacking the horse was their strength. Therefore, it was the way they attacked and got out quickly because of their skill on the horse. As you did since they were little, they were put on the horse and they had to master the art of the horse.
We also see here when they conquer, something that made me laugh was this one. They saw their objective in China because they were not producers, and they always had to market to be able to have something that other people did create, and they saw in the Chinese Empire an opportunity for conquest, to be able to expand not only their empire, but also to have that opportunity of no longer having to buy, if not only to be replaced once, have conquered. But something somewhat surprising about the efficiency of the Mongol soldier is that all of them had to, and say they all had a needle and a thread, they had to know how to sew. It was also part of his discipline, sewing, that is. Imagine, it is something unthought of. Not that a tough soldier has to be as much as he says he is. And independent, because that's what I think James Khan was, because he was always independent. He had to learn, and he made his soldiers that way. He forged them that way.
Why? Because there was no one, only them, they too, that they fend for themselves. Then because women did not go to war, because women did not accompany them. So you had to meet your own needs, learn to meet your own needs, survival, a rule there.
That's right, and it's true. No. So they objectify China, and it seems to me that Genghis Khan put him in prison in China for a while, if I'm not mistaken.
It was considered clear once he loses one of these battles and he cannot and is imprisoned. But in the end, between a very good strategy, he is free again. But what we are going to see above is both the desire to live that he had to survive many adversities. And as I tell you, he was a person who was focused. He did not always lose his focus, and that focus that made him able to survive to all that.
Of course not. And we also see that the Chinese Empire creates the Great Wall of China. That's why, to avoid Mongol attacks or the Mongol Empire. But they were so good at what they did that it was irrelevant that they had a wall so bad that they couldn't stop it.
What happens is that obviously being nomads, they were in different places and you couldn't cover all the terrain. So they were building here and invading you elsewhere.
Exactly. And then they came in, they made room for him because that was the strategy, and they didn't have a very large army. They think the most they had in Ian, that is, as an army, there were 110 to 150,000 soldiers maximum. But the strategy was always like a boxer, hit and don't hit you.
Low causes and don't have low go fast. That's why their attack was so fast, because they were good on horses, and then we go attack and return conquest.
Exactly, and they dominate. I even think that they advanced the entire Chinese Empire to Korea. Practically, he becomes the scan. No, logically, the big boss, the king, could say no, but here comes the important thing. That is, here he has to come back. Look more diplomatic, because apart from the codes, not what he has. He knew that he, with the army he had, could not dominate all the land he was conquering. And this is where it's important how he implements his wisdom to keep things at peace with those people he had already conquered.
But because at the end of the day, you have to be the conqueror, it brings a lot of enemies too. So you have to know how to make deals, arrange diplomatically. That's why there were alliances, marriages, different types of tactics back then, so that your enemy stops being your enemy and becomes your ally.
Of course. And one of the basic rules that he imposed, because he knew that most of the problems of the Mongol Empire were, as we talked about before, horses and women. He forbade women from being kidnapped or being objects. That is a total prohibition, because he experienced it firsthand, right? Not only with his wife, but also his mother. It was part of something similar, wasn't it? And here comes another thing that surprises me. No, I think that Genghis Khan was way ahead of its time when it came to equality. No, because he put a lot of women in administrative positions in his empire, of course.
Because he had lived it within his environment with his wife, then his wife and his mother, because in the end his mother stayed. Or he shared his clan with his brothers and saw that they were residents and that they did not have the same power in the military and war part, but the wisdom and determination they had was great. So that is why he could, and saw that role that they could fulfill within his, let's say, his planning. Where could they be from? Because of your own experiences. In other words, it is said that they were important and that they had important roles too.
Historians, that perhaps that was the greatest thing about Genghis Khan. He not only chooses good generals, but also chooses good diplomats and gives people a chance. It seems that he was a person who sought competition, that is, competent people, and regardless of trades, origin, religion. Because remember that he also dominated the Muslim area, dominated all these areas, not which one. Something that really caught my attention, because he was a man who wanted to learn. It is also said that he called a congregation to start exposing their ideologies, the Islamic religion, the Catholic religion, the Christian Buddhist religion, and he in those times, none of these religions. They debated among themselves, but with the he being the he that is the person who did the audit, people exposed and debated. And so it was that he understood even more about not only the culture, but also about their convictions, the convictions of these people. And something that surprised me was that he deduced that he thought women were the biggest reason for wars, because that's what I lived, what he had to live, until he changed the rules. But he realized that religion, it became significantly worse.
Important.
From A to war, of course.
As you said, it is true.
he was one of the participants in what is called meritocracy. He has a position according to merit, and not because I am the boss and I put you, if not put the most qualified people in those leadership positions. He considered that for his entire empire to go well, the best people should be in the key positions or in the positions they needed. That person is trained. It's not that he doesn't have the capacity, but I simply prefer to delegate to someone who is capable in this matter, let's say so. So it is said that the practical one is meritocracy, that is being there for a merit, for your own merit.
Of course, and he was very supportive of Confucius' philosophy too.
Yeah, he had a lot of influence. Different cultures, because in the end, conquer, and as you say, put them to debate and first know the weaknesses of each one. Also, don't think that it's just to know yourself or to argue if it's not okay to know the weaknesses of other cultures because knowing how they think helps you know what their limitations are. Sure, it's super wise. Let's see, I want to know about you. Tell me, let's discuss to know what your weaknesses are, what your strengths are, what you can fail in, what you cannot fail in. For example, on such days we can't do anything. So I attacked you that day because you weren't doing anything.
Got papaya like this.
That day we dedicated ourselves to prayer. That day you will be praying and no, don't fight. So I conquer you. Let's see it this way. So know your opponent, know what you think, know what they believe. Your habits, that's valuable information. Remember that knowing is a main tool for all of us, knowledge.
Of course. And we see the sense of his curiosity, not the curiosity to learn, because as you say, he did come from a family where study was instilled in him. He was inculcated to learn more. And it seems that despite everything that happened to him, never ever ceased to cease in him. Be curious about other things, something that surprised me a lot, because sometimes we don't think so much about the geniuses that he was in combat, that is in the Battle of Kiev, because he also invaded all of Russia in
Russia.
This one thing that made me laugh was that they knew that the Russians were too many for them, and one strategy that really left me speechless was that they didn't have enough wood to make their bows. Now the Russian army, that is, at that time they could not use the arrows of those of the Mongol Empire, but the Mongols, the ones of the Mongol Empire, could use the arrow with their trees of the Russian Empire. So they took a small army and put a little bit of, as well as straw and wood, so that the Russian army of that time could shoot all this arrow. And that was when they managed to have enough ammunition to be able to attack it, a Kiev which they practically annihilated. That is, they left no one behind.
So as we speak, it's genius, and knowing knowledge is that, knowledge. Know your enemy, what their strengths and weaknesses are, of course.
Of course, and here we also see how he reasoned. And how he also thought about solutions, right? I don't have enough wood. Well, I'm going to use your own weapons to generate that, aren't I? Because I can't produce it, and that's already produced by the other army. I'm going to create a tactic so I can take what I need, and use it against them, which is the funniest thing about this. Not use your own tools and weapons against the same army he's fighting.
Certainly, the observation here is integral and clear to the situation at hand. Of an approach and knowledge, that's nothing more than that's what you have to bring. Part of that today is that we people can once again have a focus and have a strength of our own to focus and be self-sufficient. Because he, at the end of all the characters in the story we have seen, has those particularities. If we add some characters, what happens that the vast majority were focused people. If we start seeing every one of the characters we have seen so far, everyone, they haven't lost their focus.
Sure, and rather they became more obsessive about the approach.
Of course, and that made them develop techniques, develop experiments that they know and have to know, because everyone was in this no more, because they were focused. So the only thing that has to be brought, those virtues, to the present, so that we can have more relevant characters from the story.
Additionally, the progress observed shouldn't be neglected, but supported and amplified to ensure its continuity, enhancement, and growth, while embracing its broader implications. Of his wisdom and how he managed, because he knew that the empire was as big as him, as you said, He had to put people who achieved merit to manage, but he was a person who, despite having such a large empire, he still ate what his soldiers ate. He was never a person who dressed in linen or dressed in silk or gold. He was a person who liked the nomadic life. I mean, it never changed. I mean, that's something that I want to talk about a little and develop the topic more. He didn't let power corrupt him in that respect because there's no monument to him anywhere. There are no buildings made in his honor. None of these things. That is, he ate the same as his soldier. He slept within in the same environment as his soldiers. What kind of leader do you believe in? What? In what? He was transformed by everything he was.
He lived because, let's see, he forced himself. He was a nobleman, let's say. He was a nobleman, and then he was a commoner, and he forged his character. That he was, as he became, as the most common soldier, because we arrived like this, no one wanted him. That is, nor did they want to help him. So he had to train himself. So that formed his character so as not to feel like someone different, and that when he came to power, he remained the same. I mean, he didn't need the value of anything or anyone. The very fact of Genghis Khan was enough. Certainly his lifestyle reflected who he was.
Clear and nominated by others because they gave him the title. As the supreme being of them says, it is not that he alone self-disseminated.
Sure. So my point is that he lived through all this, lived through the good and the bad. So the only way to live or survive can act that way. I know, and it didn't change. That is, and I being the same, let's say the same private. So he ate with everyone. He dined with everyone, apart from that part of his simplicity of, let's say, simplicity. In point of view, we already know that he was a character.
In other things,
Indeed, his simplicity stood out, or his behavior, let's say the simplicity of his behavior, which was that he was also deep down imprisoned and all. So he didn't have to please anything. Previously, when he was little, yes, because he was like, we already saw him. He was the son of the supreme chief of his clearing, but then he was nothing. He's what he's known all his life, running away, being chased. This transformation showcased him as a unique leader who adapted and inspired differently.
of course, Jan, the inspiration that his soldiers must have when they see what he is, one more than he magnifies us before his soldier, rather he has a sense of belonging with them. I think that speaks volumes about his sense of unity with his soldiers because they know that like him, he was soldier in his time. He knows that it is not so good to be a soldier, no, because one has to have so many commitments and you always have to sacrifice more. I think this also gave a good note to understanding human behavior because something that is not talked about much about Genghis Khan is his understanding of human behavior, not just in the art of war, but also as a motivational leader. I think very few talk about this, but I see that he motivated by being influential, by leading by example. What do you think, David?
Yes, because let's see, at the end of the day, although you are the supreme leader, you don't need that value, but rather he needed to be with his entire army, because at the end of the day, they all went to war and everyone was equal in the battle and within their codes. Own was that. So he never needed validation. That's why he remained a slave. Let's say not a slave, just another warrior. And his behavior was to be like a warrior because he didn't have this thing that he never needed validation from others. He stood up for himself for the way he was then, and he was motivational because all of us in the profession that we are in, leaders often go and are with you and accompany you. You also feel part of that pack. And let's say it like that, but instead that leader is above you. You see that the best things are for the leader. You create a resentment.
Of course, and not just a resentment, but different classifications in which you do not feel that you are at the level. And that is why I tell you that it is Iskan. You can see that he has a good understanding of how not to do it, how not only to give him the courage that his soldier deserves, but also to give him dignity. Because that is the problem of many leaders in companies, that they value their position more than the human value that does the work for them. And when this coordination does not exist, it does not give value and dignity to employees. There is the discord, there is the resentment, there is the thought that this person does not have the best intentions for me. By and logically, in the resentment of the atrocious thought of thinking, why should I give him the best if he's not giving it to me? Genghis Khan left no doubt for his soldiers about it, or even let them think about it, because as you say, for him, that was his family too. I think he saw them as family.
No, because in the end, it depends on them to continue living, because at the end of the day, they lived fighting, let's say so. So if I behave the same way with everyone, they will defend me. In other words, we are all going to fight for the same purpose. And the moment I need help, I am going to receive it, because in the end, I don't. I am part of it. I am part of this, let's say, of this group. So we all fight equally. We are all equal, and we all deserve the same respect at the same classification. Let's call him that, because at the end of the day, part of his code was that.
Of course. And we see how in that code he is an honorable and respectable man. However, we see that he also does not have codes, other things do not. Or for example, the sexual excess with the women that he conquered, logically in each town, something that I do know in advance is that many people think that Genghis Khan went and killed everyone. No, he had to really have a good purpose to be able to annihilate everyone. For example, he didn't do it like someone who says, I'm going here and I'm going to kill them all. No, he is a person who, I give you a good example. I think he was against the Persian army, if I remember correctly. He sent some diplomats so they can talk, and so they surrender and not have to fight the army. I think it was the Muslim army, or what Afghanistan is today, or it was the Persian. I don't remember very well, and it turns out they kill all the diplomats. And likewise, Genghis Khan, no, he's not impulsive. He orders again. Other diplomats kill him again. So with that, he said, well, I'm going to do makeup for these people. So he had a justification for committing genocide. A lot of people, I'm not saying this is okay. What I'm saying is he wasn't a psychopathic person in the way that I got up today. And it made me feel such rage towards this empire or nation, especially him. Did he validate why he needed to eradicate all his enemies?
Yes, let us consider what we have observed so far in depth.
He was a meticulous strategist who didn't act on impulse. His planning revolved around evaluating sacrifices, envisioning victories, and crafting a path for success. Strategic questions drove his actions. How, why, and in what way would success be achieved to outwit his adversaries?
What do I need to do it? Are there many questions you have to ask? So it's not that you go crazy and say, oh, today you throw a coin or something in the air. You say, oh, I'm going to do this. It's not preparation either, because that's not it. It's not forced from night to morning. And it's not that the decision is made. If it rains tomorrow, I'll kill 500. If it's sunny tomorrow, I'll let them live, right? In other words, it is based on a strategy.
And in those times, battles were won by strategy, because everyone had the same weapon. Everyone had the desire to fight, to not be conquered. So what won battles back then was strategy. And those were put by the leader.
And here we also see how that decision to live in isolation perhaps takes me a lot, they are not, to control his emotions, but also to ask himself those questions. No, the question is, well, if I survive, how am I going to get what is mine? How am I going to rescue my wife? And you see here very clearly how this leader, Genghis Khan, not only asks intelligent questions, but challenges emotion not to. That is the emotion. He uses her as an inspiration to achieve his purpose, but he uses logic to take the steps that he needs, that motivation. Because he is not an impulsive person, like you just said. He was not an impulsive person. He was a very thinking person. But he used his emotion like the trigger to win, yes.
I don't know, but for me, it wasn't impulsive, because I'm telling you, battles were won by strategy. At that time, it wasn't because everyone had almost the same tools. Everyone was the same strategy. It was to wonder many things too. Obviously, if they attack me from the flank, like I do as I surprise, I don't have the resources I get. And obviously people have to know that it's not that these battles took place from one day to the next. They were small situations and the small battles were going on. The decisions that were also made.
Do you believe they possess a relatively small army compared to others as well? Did it also lead you to always ask yourself those strategic questions? No, because, for example, the Chinese Empire was much more. We're talking millions, not the Mongol Empire only had, I believe, up to 120,000 soldiers. I mean, I didn't have any more. So they were forced to be strategists? Sure.
Why? As you mentioned, being outnumbered by adversaries hindered their ability to achieve victory. In a chaotic clash, the opposing army was far more numerous. Let's elaborate on this. It was significantly larger. If he starts fighting fiercely one-on-one, they would inevitably face defeat. While one may be a great warrior, it's insurmountable to overcome a ratio of 10 to 1. Every individual would need to vanquish 10 enemies, which is implausible. Therefore, if I devise the right tactics, success is feasible because defeating all 10 isn't obligatory. Kill 3, but I make them flee, and I do, and there I have to catch the leader so that the army surrenders. So it's a whole strategy. As I grab it, as I go, as the amount decreases, with them I have to put together a good strategy. So that's what I had to do.
I observed her yesterday and imagined if Genghis Khan were a modern entrepreneur today, what remarkable feats would he achieve in the realm of commerce? With the logic and the understanding and logically the resilience that he has and the adaptability that he had.
Would you present it as a comprehensive strategy involving a figure committed to initiating sales endeavors?
Oh, absolutely. It could represent an individual of extraordinary skill, akin to what is often described as prodigious.
Sales would be 1C.
Or in itself, 500, yeah.
Personally, I might envision positioning it in a setting like the car sales industry.
And for example, I really like your analysis of if he were a businessman today. I think it would perhaps be a little intimidating to negotiate with him just because of the desire that he always has to be determined to achieve his goal. Be that as it may, but of course always respecting their codes of honor. Now, what do you think his weakness is? Because the code of honor can be a weakness and also a strength. No, yes.
If I were given the option to choose and placed in a position where a decision had to be made, then I'd deliberate carefully.
I know that if I don't choose the same thing well, and I don't have the option to change because I am the one who set those rules, let's put it that way, or they put it and I wouldn't have been the Tan, for example. What if I wanted to rise? I had to kill him, capture him traditionally, or that in one of these situations, not of war, but between the desire for conquest and this of going and taking possession of vulnerable women. I killed her, for example. It was very abrupt and died. It's called a woman, and maybe in grief it was. They are being very closed, very strict. Force yourself to have these situations occur, and you cannot contradict them because you yourself put them rigorously and sentenced many people since it is rigor. So that's the LA, the weak point, that they were so rigorous and the penalties were so rigorous. So if you fell into these fouls, did you know the rigor?
It was going to be your turn then as a leader. You could not soften the situation. It was your turn.
Of course, I think one of his strengths was, and something I see psychologically, is that he was always honest. God himself, he always be so honest with himself. And I see that, for example, he wasn't trying to, that society affected him for what he was or wasn't. He was always original to what he was, regardless of whether things seemed contradictory at the time. Because remember that in him, during the time that he governed, it did not exist, as we talked before, for a woman to be an official. He always felt confident in himself, and that's something I think is one of his great psychological strengths. Now what? These changes or that are very abrupt in societies. So this to him, if it seemed to him that that was fair, he didn't care about the secondary opinion. He didn't care what they would say. It was an al-al, apparently there. He was a man very sure of himself and his convictions, and I think that perhaps also makes him have that degree of genius to be able to express what he was without having the fear of reprisal.
Yeah, because let's see. As we have already seen, if we all start to remember the scam people, we realize that he was very resident, that he didn't have anything easy. Then his valor was that, and that he forged that way. Therefore, he created a critical thinking that still continues to this day. I think that, as I tell you, now we are losing focus a lot. They can't have that kind of leaders, that kind of resilient people, even in the face of adversity, because at the end of the day, it didn't have just one diversity, but many, right? And they went.
They were universities that lived on life or death too.
Indeed, but even amid challenges, a person with solid convictions invented influential and radical thoughts during his era, which persist for me today. His birth and legacy contributed radical ideas, and their influence continues to shape many aspects even now.
Of course, and I think it's also something that I know people forget, is that the system that Gamescom implemented was very revolutionary. Why? And what do I mean? I mean, even Gamescom creates the idea of a bank because by reading, expanding so much, the merchants had to go through very long areas, not very long routes. So he created this where you could deposit your money, your goods, that is, and be able to claim it in another store. That is where you were going. For me, I mean, it's a banking system. The Italians are credited with having invented the bank, but apparently it was, we see what it had in modus operandi, right?
Yes, what happens is that, let's see, by making it clear to him, the first thing he did was to see the power as it extended. He dominated several routes, but he had to ensure, because he had to ensure trade, because he did not produce at all. In other words, they don't go to them, they don't produce anything, they need resources. So I need it to happen, that is, I protect you, but I need you to pay me something for protection. That is, I will no longer rob you to allow you to trade, because we need that flow. I need resources too, not here, but there. So I have to negotiate with all the borders to keep order. So the creation of this bank-type system was to avoid looting, to avoid good trade. The Silk Road was, I think, one of the...
The Silk Road was pivotal.
Because it was what was traded from China, and it was something that they needed from point A to point B. So if I protect this route for you, but why? Because they should not fall into chaos, because they already lived in chaos and lived badly. And that is why the Mongols were feared and known for being very aggressive, for being a people that left nothing behind. Yes, they were like that, but by unifying all this, he realized that he needed to improve a certain situation. Improve, price improve, and make sure they are obviously not looted, because you needed resources to get from point A to one point B.
It also involved managing responsibilities like ensuring fair taxation on businesses conducted via these routes. Another thing too that was very him. He had a very critical thought, as you just said in before him, even something that Thomas Jefferson greatly admired from Genghis Khan and adopted this into the United States Constitution. Was it the freedom to follow religion without being forced? No. I mean, people can choose whatever religion they want without being forced, because in those times, logically, a person was forced to be a Christian or to be a Muslim or a Buddhist. He completely prohibited this, that it was a choice of each person to choose religion and they could not be forced. That's why I'm telling you, it was something impressive, wasn't it?
But why tell you that? We ran into him at the beginning of today's talk. It was because he realized that previously the struggles and wars were over women, but he realized that religion was the worst of the most terrible causes for differences. As a criterion of each day, positions of each of the people who defend the religious part. So that's why I don't know, you see, that's the problem. So you can't impose on something that's going to cause you a problem.
More violence and the wisdom of giving them more freedom to choose instead of prohibiting it, because by prohibiting it, logically, you are going to create a revolution. But by giving them freedom, I mean, yes, cool, you want your religion?
No problem.
Practice it, but you can't force another one that easily. In other words, you have the freedom to do whatever you want, but you can't force others to follow your religion, which was a very strategic move. I mean, that's why I'm telling you, his thoughts are very advanced. And also what I see here, how much he must have learned by seeing all these problems that existed in these different cultures that he was able to solve. Not little by little, then it seems to me, I'll tell you the truth. Many of me see you as a strategist, as a barbarian. I do see them on a genius level. Genghis, right?
It's as they say, there's another type of genius out there. It is not the genius of the wise. It is not the genius of the skilled, of a special skill. But his genius, apart from his military strategy, was solving problems that we now see as simple. But at that time, how do you solve that problem?
There were no laws, right?
Sure. One, there was no law. Two, there was no formal education like there is now. It was wisdom he's been through, his father or your mother or what you went through. It was no longer, there were no books, there was no writing or language. He cements it and he does it. He lands it because do you already know that then the Mongols do have to order themselves and have their language alphabet? Yes, yes. Because he realized that that was a big problem, that they did not have their own identity. And he also gave them that identity. So he solved problems that we now see as a simple process, but that we have experienced a different situation with a formal education. He didn't have a formal education. So he could solve these situations at that time. They give him a genius.
Of course, and we also see, because we have done some episodes with Tesla, we have done an episode with Vivian, and we see how ahead these characters are in their time, right? And we see at Genghis Khan as a man who could easily live today, and you wouldn't realize it. That is, in the aspect of his diplomacy, his strategy, his leadership, of many of these factors. Logically, the barbarians, I think it would be that he would be in jail, not with the barbarian out, but we see that Genghis Khan was not an impulsive person. I mean, I wasn't going with...
Yes, but if you consider it, had he not been barbaric, he certainly wouldn't have made his mark.
Conquered, I agree with you 100%. It came from eating that instinct, killer instinct, yeah.
Yet he wasn't just a destroyer. He built, organized, and fostered culture after conquests. He understood it wasn't solely about annihilation, but also about leaving something substantial behind, even through barbaric means. 100% does not protect you. It does not generate a Silk Road. It does not generate a language and an identity for the Mongols. It does not generate putting in key positions whoever deserves it, and not this one. He is my friend, my general. I put this no, so he did it. I mean, it is another type of genius. The guy had to be a barbarian to conquer, but also making these decisions gives him his genius.
Sure, why? Oh, that's the legacy, the one he leaves behind. He doesn't leave us a legacy. The teaching of the importance of suffering. No, that is what suffering does for our growth today, that we live off immediate gratification, because unfortunately we are producing dopamine without making the slightest effort. And that's the same as a person who has a drug addiction. It's one. In modern life, we often seek quick rewards for little labor, forgetting that true satisfaction stems from effort, perseverance, and meaningful work. In other words, his effort led him to small victories of his own that inspired us to continue, to knit, to conquer, but also to leave a legacy that today we not only talk about, but we also admire how advanced he was in his time, which he was, well.
In an era without structured studies, formal languages, or means of transcendence, his achievements reached such heights that we're still discussing him today. There are incredible stories, fascinating books, eloquent phrases, even originating from a time when no formal written language existed. Then emerged someone who transcended history, remembered eternally for their profound importance.
Certainly. And which one might you mean? Reflecting on all the remarkable endeavors he undertook, enabling him to accomplish today's achievements, is astounding. He achieved so much, it's undeniable that some sense of purpose must have driven him, of patriotism towards his. Because remember that they were all nomads. It wasn't like someone who says a country that they all had the same one. They did have the same codes, but not the same cultures. No, everyone had their own culture as a nomad. But do you think that when he developed this vision of unifying the entire Mongol Empire was born in him, patriotism generated the
Spirit because it did not exist. Spread across various regions, every individual fiercely protected their land or lineage. To unify such diversity, one had to merge perspectives, foster collective pride as a shared ambition, and nurture growth among all. This unified pride in their race not only strengthened them but also paved the path to conquer new heights. But the foremost challenge he faced was achieving unity among all, as people held vastly different ideas and visions. His greatest accomplishment was likely instilling a shared sentiment, organizing meticulously, creating effective structures, and establishing comprehensive guidelines to align everyone's actions towards a singular direction. Correct and simultaneously with a comprehensive, easy-to-grasp understanding, ensuring everyone embodies patriotism effectively. To illustrate, it wasn't a state in the past, rather it didn't hold that characterization as it lacked coherence.
state.
It was a race that was distributed.
That said, it was a distributed race because that's what nomadic, not the same distributive race in different places. Something I really liked what you said was the sense of belonging, of unifying. This situation influenced what was mentioned earlier, David, regarding gestural calligraphy instead of structured writing, ensuring not only the preservation of legacies, but the continuation of narratives. Also, Genghis Khan notably preferred not to be documented or celebrated. Instead, his remarkable influence is reflected in how people remember and recount his greatness, emphasizing the significant connections he fostered during his lifetime, establishing his memorable legacy.
Because we've already seen that all these genes don't really like recognition, not that it's their turn. Do you like leaving a legacy?
That's right.
Leaving that is a beautiful legacy for me. Outside of they were barbarians and everyone, it's a legacy for the thoughtful.
Yes.
Within the destruction caused was a constructive legacy.
Of course, this is that logically to build, sometimes destruction brings more construction. It's almost like a law of life. A question for both of you, what legacy would you like to leave for yourself? Because since we're talking about always, we're talking about geniuses and these characters, what would be the printing house or legacy you would like to leave, David?
My advice to my daughters is rooted in prioritizing readiness to absorb knowledge and adapt decisively, understanding the importance of clarity in choice while embracing continuous learning. Make decisions. So I told him, I can't teach you anything. I can tell you what the world is like, what you need. But at the end of the day, it is you who has to make the decisions because it is up to you to decide and know what is good and what is bad. You already know it, but you decide. That is, at the end of the day, what I as a father can teach you or the legacy that I can leave you is to teach you so that you know how to say. Because at the end of the day, always all of us have to decide then. If I teach everything, it is you who makes the decision based on what I have taught you the power to decide. And I always tell my daughters, I can't teach you anything because in the end, when you are in a situation, you are the one who decides, not me. I can teach you how to make the decision, but you are the one who makes it in the end. I think that's the legacy that it is for me. I leave them and teach my daughters the art of decision making.
Sure, and that is something that is very important. Like one as a parent, logically teach them to discern information because that's the only thing one can do. That is give them critical thinking, how you discern certain information, how you look for more perspectives, etc. Emotion, logic, but at the end of the day, the logical emotional debate, the subconscious, the unconscious, and consciousness, the rest is one's own analysis that one leads the DC to decision-making power.
Sure, why? Many times I like to talk to them not about the achievements, but about my mistakes, but not so that they make my mistakes, but so that they take this that I decided badly, and that the consequences of saying badly that they see clearly is you have to teach him the face, the two faces of love, the good and the bad. So because at the end of the day, I'm not going to be with them when they make decisions. So that's it. Do you know that they know how to decide?
Of course, they mark us, don't they? Because you said it very well. The decision-making power of Genghis Khan was, I tell you, a very admirable thing, despite the good and the bad. because all people have good and bad things. But his decision-making power shows that his discernment of information and the life experiences that he had led him to make astute decisions in many things, because he believes that he was more astute than he knows. He had a lot of astuteness, that more than wisdom. But we see that also on his compassionate side, he made him a good diplomat, because he also explored that part of him and me, which I always think of as a legacy. Likewise, that my children be good people in society, that their decisions be based on love less, that is, that it be the complete opposite of ego, pride, so that they and their decisions are in shock to peace. Or to the connection of being able to unify, develop, build, and if they make a mistake, see the meaning of what it is to make a mistake. Because when one makes a mistake, there is a meaning. There is so much importance of information that although it hurts us to admit it at the moment, there is so much valuable information that we forget that. That is the fruit of growth. Not from there, as you said one day, it is the fruit of wisdom, not error, making mistakes, stumbling, getting up again, being resilient, and logically, the legacy that I would personally like to leave that based on my children? No, but personally it is trying to give more perspectives to human beings, especially in the world we live in today. We live in a world that knows. He lives from egocentrism, he lives a lot from manipulating the other person, especially those who have the needs to use power to be able to bring people to the edge of the ledge. We see so much corruption, we see so many negative things. And if this channel that is watching the conversations that you and I have, David, can expand knowledge, philosophy, psychology, can generate a small change, even if it is only obvious, I think that would be a great legacy. Let someone, just one person, remember, say, hey, that's good, David. I remember what they said about that Genghis Khan conversation. And what I learned from that is that I need learning through suffering and being resilient, right? I think that would be a beautiful legacy. So it's just one person. Now, if there are many more, all the better, but I think that's the intention behind all this.
It is summarized in a chapter that we saw, that we do not forget what we did, and that I know that you know it very well because you are a Christian. My words scatter like seeds into the wind.
That's right. You didn't say it, hey, you killed it. You said it very perfectly there. Throw the seeds and it's up to you to make it grow, right?
And as I saw around one, the farmer sows, and he is not every day taking out or digging in the land to realize whether it is growing or not, but he is germinating that seed. No, he believes in the process. I did good. This is one. The correct way, planted from there, a tree will come out. He doesn't have to be digging up the seed every day to see that it is germinating. No, he believes in the process as well. We have to believe in the process, but for that we have to act well. That's right. And even if the rest don't, no, this is a me, and that is me, and like me may cause a change in a person. But I am happy that that person also does the same multiplier effect, and we will no longer be one or two. We are going to do many.
Of course, and that's what it's about, not, as you say, of germinating, of producing, of sowing, and knowing how, as you said, to sow in fertile soil. I mean, that's important. Where does your seed fall in fertile soil? But what did we both learn, David, to close the Game Cam chapter today? You already learned that chapter, and I'm going to answer that one too.
Ask, look, something that is repeated, which is being resilient in the face of adversity, focusing, making the best decisions, and being what is going to help me for the generations that are watching us, is for us to generate changes from our experience, changes towards humanity, or changes to improve, because all of us have to leave a legacy, and that legacy, although it seems small for ourselves, is a very big legacy. And we do not give that legacy to an entire community because we are not community leaders, but to the small fragment that we have of society, this family, our family. And that multiplier effect will be seen over time. And it will be like when you throw a stone into the sea,
it will create that shockwave and it will expand. So with that small nucleus of society that is the family, we can generate that great change or generate that movement of the sea, the river, the water when you throw a stone. And that also tells me that inside something chaotic or generate something heretic.
Very well said. I loved it. I think what I learned apart from residency is the power of adaptation. And through the experiences we have as we implement what we have learned in adaptation to become more human and diplomatic. And we see that in Games Camp, not of being a barbaric nomad, extremely disciplined, a person, like you said, also a person strict with his codes, to become a person who expanded his knowledge to understand others so that he could not only unify his own people, which gave him the, as you say, or the identity of being Mongolian, but also to unify to the different other races he conquered and really promote diversity of thought, of religion. It's amazing to see when we have a clear goal, so we don't know how to do it yet. Learning on the path of adaptation, because you touch the resilience of resilience is so important, because it gives you all the information that you didn't have, because you are still in the growth process, right? If you are not a resident, you are not following the growth present, and there is no vital information to make better decisions. And I see that Genghis Khan cunningly used this to being the great conqueror that he was, and leaves us a legacy of asking ourselves, what is our great conquest? Not what do we want to achieve by being in a much better position than he was. And like you said, we don't influence through family, friends. But this is the responsibility that both David and I have, that we're both professionals to deal with. To influence the people who listen to us in the best way, not so that they believe in the words they decide, but so that they can create their own convictions through what we are teaching. That was something vital that really impacted me a lot on the dog. And no, I didn't imagine reaching that point. I'm telling you the truth, David, but he really left me that, didn't he?
I like these talks that we have, this podcast, that we have people who listen to it. It's the fact that we see a different side of the story of characters than a lot of those controversial underdogs and give it a different look. And for me, the final speech we give always seems to me to be the summary, and with from different views, but at the same time assertive.
Right, definitely.
But also let this orientation that we people make when they manage to hear and see us, give it a different meaning. If it were good that communities were created to talk about the same thing, not only about the characters that we are seeing, about everything, because in the end, question or talk, it makes us think a lot. People don't think now, they don't think much now, because as you said, we have many things within reach and we haven't become idiots. We are in a society that is I see it as very submissive. We have led to the majority of society liking everything to be delivered simplified. So I think we need a little disorder within this order, and we can generate that.
Yes, I'm good, David. What are we going to talk about in our next program? Where do you want to venture this time?
I don't know, brother. I don't know what issues we have. What happens is that each topic is, I don't know. We turn the character around as we speak, but in the end, that's why I'm telling you, the final script seems to me to be the most controversial. Well, why he is a summary, although we turn the character around, we talk about him, but the final speech within the position of each one we leave, I don't know something, but how it turns out.
Ultimately, it forms an impression, a legacy, doesn't it?
Yes, the final speech is the one that accommodates it. Well, he doesn't accommodate it, he makes it. And the final speech is generate awareness too. So yes, the final split is for me, let's say, the most complicated thing, because in the end, it is what you want to guide people to also generate something.
Of course, well, I have a topic for you since we are talking about society and the psychological impact it is having. Everything that is being facilitated, not as you say, everything is being simplified. Why don't we talk about a psychological aspect that touches on that topic? What is the person and the shadow? Carl Jung's theories, yes, I think you'll like it very much.
Please provide the details, as the shadow bears a significance that's hard to ignore nearby.
Considering it so thoroughly, the conclusion
conclusion is undoubtedly surprising and compelling. I think he's here. He's gonna rub your head.
Yes, because I managed to understand Sigmund Freud for real, which cost me at first.
Absolutely. And we should note that Sigmund Freud delves into the subconscious while Carl Jung explores the unconscious, discussing phenomena beyond conscious recognition. Let me explain this topic further, hoping it captivates you as expected.
The unconscious is indeed fascinating in its complexity and mystery. Introverts, but inside change, the subconscious is the bottom, that is good or bad.
So is this one too?
Is it internalized? I mean,
Of course, it's deeper and it's like unconscious. It doesn't happen. It happens without thinking about it. It's handled by...
that's what you call it, like the shadow.
Yes, it's called the person and the shadow. And more or less to give you an idea, people are the masks that we use to establish in a society or the rules that they implement. A society, and that those masks that we use makes it reduce what we really are. And that represses many things that go into your shadow, and in your shadow there are dark things. Because everything you do as a person, because of the masks you wear to look good with your friends, to look good with you, whether with relationships, responsibilities, or cultural expectations, these countless masks erode our true individuality and push suppressed traits into the shadow.
Don't say hello to anyone, Chucha. They're all worth dick.
Exactly. But logically, here we are talking about two psychological issues that go hand in hand, right? Why we wear different masks, and we can be ourselves, not when you are alone. You are yourself. There is no one to judge you. There is no reason to wear a mask. However, the difficult thing is to confront the shadow, which you have already repressed so much of who you are. But society, you feel that society is going to repress him. It's not going to accept him as you are. So it exists. There are traumas, right?
In essence, the masks we don't continuously nurture the shadow, creating repressed traits and various psychological challenges.
Of course. For example, if you know someone you like, I guess, and I suppose you don't have money, you wear a mask, don't tell the truth that you don't have it, right? Aha, you are a mask. That is, you begin to hide what you really are to pretend to someone else what you want to be to them. Are you going to tell me, well, I don't have money, I'm broke, I can't take you to dinner? No, you're going to put on a mask at that moment, a person, so you can look good with that person. But what happens is that you're lying to yourself, right? And you begin to eliminate the real you, the real you who has no money, who has no way to take her out to eat, right? Or to invite her to dinner. So that builds your shadow, of course. So it more or less goes. I believe you'll enjoy the David topic immensely.
No, yes, I like it because I learned.
But then we have to talk about some chemistry, David.
All right, let's prepare more of that in advance.
And you're the one who has to choose, the chemistry one.
Not that specific idea though.
Hey, by the way, how's Dostoevsky's book coming?
You know, I stopped him. It's in the middle. And what happens is that by giving me more responsibilities, because already, or that the first month of adaptation, but already in this one, they are giving me, well, they're leaving 6:30 H, 19 H at night, almost to the company arriving 8, or I arrive and pass. From 8 to H6, I step outside then and at 2 H has already started doing administrative activities and has been doing it here. Lots of sun, and I was in a car with no air conditioning. Then I would see corduroy. I would take the underwear, squeeze it, and then the sweat would come out more or less like that to Guayaquil, and I would run out of breath. So that made me exhausted, but it's good. I fell asleep at 8 p.m.
Sit down early.
Of course, because it was coming. He hasn't done anything. He came here with me, talked to the girls, bathed, and went to sleep. 8:30 H, I was sleeping.
But at this point, what are your thoughts on the book as things unfold?
The genius of the author is to create the creation of the characters and how he unites us within the plot and not how he left it. And the analysis my daughter did. At one point, he speaks in the first person, and at another, in another paragraph, he speaks as in the third person or in the second person. So you have to really pay attention and read it, because you don't know at what point he's talking about from the first person approach in second or third. Then then it is a reading that you have to put the matter on, because you don't know at the end of the day if you don't pay attention to it, right?
Are you lost?
You get lost because in the moment he talks to you in first, second, or third person.
So he seems super good to me. My daughter is reading it too. If I told you, then we add criteria, and also here is another flu or 1 COVID type. Then you remember that we were going to record and I'm not ruined and I'm agitated again. So we are. We are going around in the family. What is the name of the problem of my daughters? Me, my wife, then again my daughters, my wife, and me again. So we're in that circle.
What a beast, Alan Brothers.
And so they are. In all families, I think they are giving him.
Back to the same thing, like a rotation practically.
Of course, obviously, if someone in the family is affected either from their work or schools, the same family nucleus, and again, everything repeats itself. Proceedings, and some say that, well, they don't say they have done tests and it's COVID. That is, in the end, they don't know. They know if it's a crystal disease.
Or it's COVID. Well, David, I love you. I want to make a public recognition. First of all, your total support for the podcast, support for me because we have been friends for so many years. Imagine, I think we know each other since we are 910 years old. Or before, because we were in primary school together. This clear, that is with your brother, but practically we all went to the same bush.
Sure, I've been you 30 years over 30.
Years more than 30 years even, or not. We have known each other for about 35 or 36 years because I want to give you public recognition, not only for your support, for your kindness, for your nobility, forever, for also being an education teacher, despite that is in your, not only in your area, but also in other areas, logically, the recognition of your father and your mother, your father for being a very eloquent person, very educated, a man who was always submissive to education, and your mother, a straight woman of codes, a woman of good temper, noble, very good person. With good character, yes, noble, but with character. He was never selfish, he was always friendly, he always opened the doors for me. And I wanted not only to thank you, but to them, because all this comes from them, this person who forged you in your day, plus this educational, but also as a person, right? And I thank you for your friendship publicly, logically, many years. We know each other, so I never want that to be lost, do I? And I thank you from the bottom of my heart, not only for being part of the cast, but for believing in this project as well, right? And I thank you very much for that one.
Hello, brother. Look, see this part of what we have known each other for a long time. Well, and you know the family. I also know your mother, your father, maybe you at the time when you were in Guayaquil. Sometimes you were alone. Aha, and part of mom. To also try to know who her children are interacting with, because the phrase "tell me who you win from who you are" was important. So from my mother's side, it was also to know the relatives we have at school or near the house. That's why many times within her mother's authority, sometimes she already caught your attention or drew the attention of many people within our circle of friendship, because always he believed a lot in a lot of people. She also instilled in many people attention or lack of attention or love for many people, because we live in a complicated neighborhood to try to get them to change. I remember mom always being John Wendell. Sometimes I would see him in the early hours of the morning and call Wendell to the house.
Yes, I remember when he passed by Captain Nahera.
Yeah, because that fan of education never just left. So I think that many times she was seen as messing with my mother, but well, it was her way. Thanks to her, we were able to drink correct path. Well, appropriate, let's put it that way, because correct, we always deviate from the path, every one of us. No, Brother Yi, this has always been noble, sincere friendship and has lasted, as you say, for many years. I think the best recognition is to continue talking. He is our brother. This is therapy. It is a conversation. It is to unite people with different thoughts and reach a crossroads like you. I like a speech. In the end, each one has an opinion and puts it forward so that other people also generate it. They generate that noise so that not everyone is in tune. I say, all equally dazed. It's not that that noise at least wakes up a couple of people who are sleepwalking.
Of course, you know that it would be a good podcast to talk about not only the school days, but also the neighborhood, a combination of both. Because, I mean, today in the societies we live in, there is no longer... I think that there is not so much that when we were growing up, you could see it on the surface every day.
well, maybe the situation in Ecuador is bloodier now, but before it was the theft. But despite stealing codes too, not in certain things, today there is no longer in school. Or the events that were happening. I will never tell you one, which maybe I don't know if you remember once. Once this sailor had just brought a green suitcase because you catch the flames, because everyone is fashionable.
They wanted the keys.
Of course, and a green one, and I was drawing spades, and you know that I sat next to the Iquilo, yes, and this one's already pissed me off. Unfortunate man, he takes the liquid paper, he takes it, and opens the liquid paper, and the backpack came out camouflaged. Oh, like that. Oh, so he made him laugh, and the sailor arrives, and everything says there, this one. Well, this one now. There's your egg, it's left over, and I screwed up my dear's laughter, and I never forgot that the sailor thought that I was the one who had said yes, and I laughed, but with more desire, and no, it had not been crying. I pooped laughing.
No, I remember a difference. Well, I remember this well. One of the many anecdotes was that we studied in the afternoon, and sometimes we had to be early. He brought people his food then and ate it at recess, lunch, haha. I remember that there was a kind of bucket Gurumendi had carried, and at that time I think it was from the World Cup, something like that. What do I know? And it comes from Byron and kicks that suitcase and comes out in the afternoon and waters all over the floor. It was a beet rice, beet salad, and fried meat, and it sprinkles all over the hallway and starts and picks up from the floor. He picks up everything, and I put it in the tub and put it back in. And then the novelty was seeing him eat, because this man and this man left. He already came to recess and left with his lunch. And everyone seeing that he ate the food he had sprinkled all over the hallway and that it had been picked up. And bravo, well, for a doctor, my mom didn't choose well. The rice is full of stones that I have been on the floor then.
Is that what they are?
Things that you know are wrong, but let's say that bullying and that joking are things that you won't do again now.
Of course, and that's why I'm telling you we're going to do one of those episodes. Well, I'm going to leave my bread to you as if Carlos. All David.
Very to you.
Family, we are.